everyone. Welcome to our 10th episode of the series. Today, we're going to be talking about the Asian American girl perspective, given that we are both Asian American. So we have some really interesting questions that we'll touch on today. As an Asian American, having grown up in Michigan and then now living in New York, but coming from a Chinese heritage, I'm wondering what it means to you to be an Asian American.
Yeah, I feel like my racial identity has kind of evolved over time, or like the way that I think about my cultural heritage. So growing up in Michigan, I would say that I did have a group of Asian friends, but like the suburb that I grew up in was predominantly like white. And then I feel like after I went to college, I was definitely like Ann Arbor is super diverse, and I met a lot of different people from different backgrounds. And I realized that like even within the United States, your like different people's identities were both shaped by like their cultural background as well as like the region. And then there was also the international population that was also super diverse. I feel like honestly, my like how I identified as being Asian American didn't evolve too much from like when I was growing up to college, but after I moved to New York, I do feel like I became more culturally aware of my Asian American background, and I feel like after I started dating my now husband, I also became more in touch with like my Chinese background because he grew up in China. So I feel like that piece of identity, I feel like talking to him, he's very into Chinese history, culture, and food, so I feel like that was also a good experience. And then interestingly enough, when I moved to Boston, one of the reasons that I didn't like it as much as New York is because it felt a little bit less diverse to me. And also I feel like there wasn't as large of like an Asian American population and less like Asian cultural things that I could do within the city. For example, like food or just like going to Chinatown. It just didn't feel as vibrant as it does in New York. So I think that is also an experience that made me realize and appreciate my Chinese and Asian American heritage.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
And then how about like when you were growing up in Michigan? Like, what was that like?
Yeah, I think like I feel like the way that I really stayed in touch with my cultural heritage was I spoke Mandarin with my family and specifically my grandparents, and then I also, when I was like 3 or 4, I lived in China for about a year and a half. So I feel like that early experience kind of shaped my cultural identity. But other than that, in Michigan, I don't feel like I had the multiple layers that I have here. So like language, food, like friends, and then just like cultural experiences. I feel like that's just much richer in New York than it was in Michigan. But now I think Michigan is also becoming like the area where I grew up. There's a lot of Asian supermarkets. There's a lot of Asian food popping up. So it's becoming more of a layer there now than it was before.
I felt similar when I grew up in Southern California. Like I would say the Asian population was 10 to 20%, I would say. But I remember like in elementary school, like all of my friends were white. And then it wasn't until maybe middle school that I started meeting more Asian friends. And I remember like walking into just generally like the city, like the grocery stores and like the neighborhoods, like also all very Caucasian populations. And it didn't really dawn on me that I was a minority growing up. But then like when I moved to like San Francisco and I moved to the Bay Area, it was actually more of a culture shock for me because I suddenly was seeing so many more Asians than growing up. Yeah, so it was definitely a culture shock, which made me realize that there is this aspect of me where I am Asian, but I didn't really feel like I was like a true Asian growing up, like from in grade school. And so I think kind of a similar boat as you, as like just kind of entering school, entering college, and then into adulthood. I definitely got way more in touch with my Asian roots, especially being exposed to like more friends who like are of many different ethnicities within the Asian culture. And so that was really cool, just to feel more ingrained and understand the culture more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And then how about like language? Do you speak the languages, or
Yeah.
like, I feel like a lot of people that grow up in the States are able to listen to the language and then speak a little bit, and then some people are able to write it. Writing is oftentimes the most difficult piece of it. So yeah. How about that?
So I think when it comes to being an Asian American, I definitely feel like I lean culturally more American because I don't speak the language, like Asian language, fluently. And so I'm ethnically Cantonese, or my parents are from Hong Kong, and I never learned it as like growing up. And so,
Really?
yeah, so I never learned it. Being a younger sibling too, like that didn't help. My brother is definitely much better. But I think that definitely was a limitation for me in terms of really feeling ingrained within the culture. Because like when I'm communicating to like my relatives, I'm normally speaking English, and I think that makes me feel like I'm definitely leaning more American than Asian. And when I'm speaking with my grandparents, like I just feel like there's like something that's kind of, I feel a little more isolated because I can't properly communicate with my grandparents. So I think when I think about what being an Asian American means to me, it's definitely, I definitely have the values of a westernized American culture. Like I really value individualism and entrepreneurship and innovation. But then there's an aspect of me that I'm definitely true like Asian because I love the food. I definitely prioritize Asian food and aesthetics and simplicity more. So it is definitely kind of a weird like in between for me.
I actually relate to that a lot because I feel like I also, having grown up in the States, have a lot of Western values, which is like individualism, freedom, creativity, like entrepreneurship, like you said. But I feel the most comfortable or at ease when like my surroundings or like living quarters are like the things that I eat, or like no shoes in the house, when these things are like more Asian habits or Chinese habits. Yeah.
So when you go to Asia, for example, do you feel more at home when you're in Asia?
I don't know if I feel more at home, but I feel like comfortable and at ease. Obviously, I feel the most at home in New York because I live here, but I feel pretty comfortable getting around China, at least.
And you also can speak the language. So that's a huge plus.
That's like helpful.
Do you ever feel like when you're in Asia that there's something that you don't fully belong? Like, do you think that people there can tell that you're not native to China?
So I've been told that when I go, like I've been told by people or like experiences that they can't tell, but that would be surprising to me actually. So I don't know if it's like a compliment or not. I think I've been told that they can't tell based off of my Mandarin. I also suspect that maybe I can like blend in more internationalized cities like Shanghai or Beijing. But I feel like if I went to like a city that was more like smaller, then they should probably be able to tell, especially if there's a regional dialect involved.
Right, where they can tell like the accent differences.
But sometimes they might assume that I'm just from a different region. That's an interesting thing, I think, to talk about, is that even within Asia, within each country, things are so multicultural, and I think that's something that I didn't appreciate until college and now.
I think that's a really interesting point about how different areas in China, for example, have many regional differences. I'm curious if you can touch more on that.
I would also like to hear about like the Hong Kong cultural identity as well. I guess I didn't really appreciate the different areas and cultural nuances basically until I like moved here and met my husband because he is from the south of China, which is culturally super different from like my background and heritage. So my grandparents are from the Jiangnan area of China, which is like the Shanghai region. And so I think what jumped out to me the most was like, one, they speak a different language, and then two, they also like eat very different things, and three, they have different cultural customs and norms for marriage, actually, as compared to, I'm pretty sure like each region of China has different cultural and norms for it. So I think like food differences, mainly I noticed that he really likes drinking soups and not eating spicy, and I really like spicy food and I like sweet and sour food, and I think that's like a regional or like cultural difference. Regions.
Definitely I can speak to that.
Okay.
So kind of like what I was mentioning about having kind of a culture shock when I moved to the Bay. So growing up, because my background is Cantonese, and so a lot of the food that I grew up eating was Cantonese, and the food is definitely not as many like spices and like many different like complex flavors. Like I wouldn't say it's bland, but it's more just like less flavorful, I would say. And so when I like went to college and I met a lot of people who are from the northern part of China, they introduced me to like Sichuan food and like peppercorn and like spicy, and I was like, wow, this is a whole new world for me. And I loved it. I loved that food so much. And then I'd go home and I'll be like, hey mom, like can we try this restaurant? It's like specializes in like spicy like chili, like and she's like, where did you learn this from? Like this is not like what we grew up or I grew up eating. So completely get that, like the differences in types of food that are eaten in the northern and the southern parts of China. Like to that point about just different regional differences, I think the unique thing about Hong Kong is that like for a while it was considered basically like separate from China, right? Because like it was colonized by the British, and then the British influenced a lot of the cultural norms within Hong Kong. And so even like when you go to the streets, like you'll see like the names of the streets are very British sounding. The English names are like Happy Valley or like just like Causeway Bay. Like these are names that sound very Western. And so there's that element. And I think having been kind of separate from China, they also have a lot of like westernized values. So they care about like democracy and like all of these different elements. And of course that's influenced like the political climate that is now existing today between China and Hong Kong. And so I would say it was very interesting, like going to Hong Kong when I was younger and kind of experiencing like this more westernized culture, and also it being like a place where a lot of expats previously really enjoyed like going to. So lots of Europeans would live there. And I think the culture is just definitely very westernized. And the food, I think, is very interesting. Like, there's an element of food called like Hong Kong cafes where it's not even like Chinese food. It's like macaroni and like ham. Like, it's like very interesting. Yeah, I'm not quite sure how the Hong Kong cafe type food came into Hong Kong, but it's a very interesting, not quite fully Chinese culture, I would say. But yeah, that was kind of like my experience, like having gone there with my family growing up. Yeah.
Cool. I haven't been to Hong Kong. I would really like to go. I've only gone on like layovers, but I would like to spend some time there, a few days. So growing up Asian American, did you experience any challenges in your childhood?
I think because I grew up in a very suburban area, it definitely was like a bubble where I feel like while I did experience some microaggression and some elements of racism, it wasn't all encompassing, which I do feel very grateful for. But I do remember I did experience some racism like going into like predominantly like Caucasian areas. So one story I remember is I did a family trip with my family to Santa Barbara one time, and I remember like walking down the sidewalk and like a group of like, I don't know, teenagers were just like making like racial slurs to my family, and like it was all like unprompted too. I think we just walked by and we weren't really acknowledging them talking to us. And I do remember like other times where I did like a road trip to like the Oregon coast, and like we walked into a restaurant and just felt like stares like as we entered the restaurant, and so clearly like we were definitely outsiders to that community. So I think it's like moments like those that, especially when I was like with immigrant parents, that like it loaned itself to experiencing more racism, but thankfully it's never gone into an aggressive point where I never felt in danger.
Okay.
I think in my adulthood, like I still remember like going to Europe sometimes, like when we went to Europe and like walking down the sidewalk and like people saying like ni hao and like assuming we were like a particular ethnicity, or assuming we were Chinese. Yeah. And especially when we had like friends that weren't Chinese too. Yeah. And so I think there's aspects of that still exist in adulthood, which is unfortunate.
It's honestly so frustrating. If you're gonna say it, at least get the pronunciation right. Okay. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, for sure.
At least make the effort to get it right. Otherwise, you just sound dumb.
Yeah. Or at least like ask what part of Asia are we from to be more informed, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. How about you? Could you tell me about any challenges that you experienced?
I think for me, growing up, predominantly the main challenge was, so my grandparents don't speak English. It was like trying to facilitate them and bring them and experience the things in the city or like in the state, but making sure that they had a comfortable experience when they had such a language barrier, and making sure that their needs and wants were being communicated to the people around them when they couldn't exactly explain themselves in English. So I think that was a big challenge. I feel like now that my grandparents are older, like another challenge that I am experiencing now is when they go into hospitals, they can't really explain that well like their pains and needs. And I feel like that's especially an issue in states where there isn't a very multicultural presence, because there's no translator. And then it makes me feel like they're not being taken seriously, and it makes me feel like they're not getting the best treatment and care possible. I feel like New York, actually, something that I really appreciate about being here is that there are dedicated facilities for like Asian Americans here where the primary language is Chinese. Like the Charles B. Wang Health Center in Chinatown is a care practice that specifically caters and addresses this issue. But like, yeah, the challenge I had like growing up and now is making sure that people in my family who can't speak English are still like able to get around the way that they want to in the US. Yeah.
And how do you navigate that now? Like, do you help support them in terms of getting the care they need?
Yeah, I think so. I think I just try to be really specific and make sure that the doctor is taking us seriously, and just making sure that like the health practice is making the best efforts and exploring the health options available instead of taking the doctor at their word.
Yeah.
And I think this is like a different issue with healthcare in the US, but sometimes like you can just encounter practices and like healthcare providers who don't take you seriously, even if the issue is not the language barrier. So I think it's just like an added layer of complexity.
Yeah, like, do you feel like because you are Asian, like they treat you differently in some ways?
I don't know if it's because of my racial identity or if it's just some people are incompetent.
Yeah. It's hard to tell. And this is something that you've experienced, like in terms of your healthcare, not necessarily your grandparents.
Yeah. Always get a second opinion, I think, and do your research.
Yeah. As far as other challenges, like, did you also experience any kind of racism growing up?
I feel like a core memory of mine is mainly, I would say no, but maybe in like second grade or third grade, I remember just like one of my classmates making a taunt about like Chinaman or something like that. And I think I'm too young to register that as racism during that time. It wasn't until like my my teacher like yelled at the kid and was like, hey, you can't say that it registered to me as being something deeply wrong and offensive.
Yeah.
So I think that was like my earliest memory of it. And now it's mostly like if we travel to a foreign country, I'm sure like you were talking about in Europe, I can second that. I have experienced it in certain countries. But luckily, living in New York, I do not experience it on a daily basis or anything like that because the city is so diverse.
Right.
Yeah.
I guess the exception would have been like during COVID when there was a lot more Asian hate.
Yes.
Yeah.
That was a scary time. Yeah. I feel like one thing that has been on my mind recently is I just feel like Asians actually experience a lot of racism in the United States, and people don't take it seriously.
Yeah.
And people don't like. I feel like we should make it a bigger deal, but people just don't raise the topic and don't address it seriously.
Yeah. Do you think it's due to maybe a lot of these incidences not being reported, like Asians being less like forward with what happens, like these different like incidences that happen to them?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, it's very unfortunate. I feel like
it's super unfortunate. I don't know, I feel like our culture is just one where we tend to not be belligerent, like we want things to be smoothed over, but it's honestly not acceptable.
Yeah, especially during that COVID time frame when like there was so much aggression.
Yeah, and also the reason that it's top of mind recently is Love Island, as you know, is a super popular show, and one of the participants said like an Asian slur on it, and like the producers are not taking it seriously.
So to conclude this episode, I'm curious, with your Asian American identity, what are aspects that you carry with you currently, subconsciously or even intentionally within your life today?
I think for me, an emphasis on continued education, which my parents really instilled in me, an emphasis on saving money and investing your money, and an emphasis on planning as much as you can for the future and to have optionality.
Like how that emphasis on high achieving was instilled in grade school, like when my parents would be like, make sure you do well in school and to get into a good college so that you can get a good job, etc., etc. Yeah. And I think other aspects to me are kind of like what we touched on about like just certain cultural elements, like taking off your shoes in the house, right? And Asian food. And I think for me, I love Asian aesthetics. And so I'm very into like design, and I think I definitely lean towards like that, the Asian aesthetic more than the Western aesthetic. So I think, these are elements that I still carry with me, even though like a lot of my values are also very Westernized and American too.
Yeah. And the last thing that I would say that I haven't mentioned before is probably like Asian holidays. I feel like or Chinese holidays specifically, I feel like I don't celebrate every single thing that there is, but Lunar New Year is definitely something that I celebrate and I take note of every single year.
Yeah. How do you celebrate Lunar New Year?
I think wear red, make dumplings, receive cash.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But now you're married, so you have to be the one giving cash.
This has not occurred to me until this was not brought to my attention until very recently. And yeah, that's another culture thing.
Yeah.
After you're married, you are supposed to be the one giving out cash, which is so unfortunate. Maybe I should have gotten married later in life.
I still remember when I brought that up to you for the first time, and you're like, "Really? What?" Yeah. So that is a downside of getting married. Now you have to give them cash. You're no longer a kid anymore.
Oh, man. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you guys so much for tuning in to this episode in our series. I think this will likely be the last episode in this initial series of the podcast. Appreciate you guys supporting us, and please look forward to the next series that we come out with.
Yeah. Yeah, which will be very soon. So stay tuned. All right.